Hey everyone, Chris here, and thanks for tuning in. In this episode, we're diving into the world of ESG strategy with Gina Panayiotou, ESG manager at the West P&I Club and a visionary in the maritime sustainability landscape. We'll explore Gina's multifaceted role in shaping environmental, social, and governance policies, the digital transformation of the maritime industry, and the importance of a united approach to sustainability. Plus, Gina shares her insights on overcoming industry resistance to change and tips for personal and professional growth in the maritime sector. If you enjoyed today's podcast, please take a moment to leave us a 5-star review. It helps us reach more listeners and keep the conversations going. Now on to the show. Welcome, everyone, and you are listening to The Last Dinosaur, and I'm your host, Chris Aversano. Our guest on today's podcast is Gina Panayiotou, ESG manager for West P&I Club. Additionally, Gina holds several other positions, including founder and chair of the World ESG Forum and guest lecturer at the MLA College. She also serves on several maritime industry boards and committees, including one of my own favorites, WISTA. In her role at West P&I, Gina formulates global ESG strategy. This is across all offices and assures that both senior leadership and the board have awareness on all ESG matters, such as DEI, operational sustainability, new sustainability product scouting, and supports club members in confidently navigating their ESG journeys. Gina, welcome to the podcast.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks so much, Chris, for the invitation. And I look forward to being part of the Last Dinosaur chats.
Well, we look forward to it. I've seen your profile everywhere. You do so much wonderful stuff. And it was definitely one of the people I said, I would love to have her on and hear what she has to say, especially about a lot of the important topics around ESG and all that goes along with it, not just the E, but the S and the G. So talk to me a little bit about what you're doing today and your role and what your day-to-day is like.
Wow, where do I begin? So, as you mentioned, I wear quite a few hats. My main role is, of course, leading the ESG strategy on a global level for West P&I Club. I'm assuming your audience is more or less familiar with P&I clubs, but the structure is that they're a mutual club, non-for-profit, so technically they're owned by their members. They're also part of the international group of P&Is, which are the 12 groups that come together and would cover like larger claims, so maritime insurance claims. I was brought on to the club about a year and a half, just over that actually now, to set up the ESG division, and that kind of involves 3 aspects. One is the club itself as a company, the operational kind of impact. So from carbon footprint to employee well-being to any governance structures. Secondly is, of course, a big part of it is understanding our members' needs as they're going through this transitional period of adopting to new technologies or automation, new types of vessels, and all the requirements that come along with sustainability and ESG. And the third part of it is being part of the discussions on the international group, where I sit on the sustainability committee to see on a larger scale. So how do we as P&I clubs support the industry through this transitional period? So as you probably know, ESG, it's not, I always say it's not new, it's what good owners have already been doing for years. It's just more of a new structure. So within maritime especially, it is a bit of an emerging kind of department. So a lot of what I do on a day-to-day basis is keeping up with regulations, what's going on around the world, updating the board, understanding how we work with members and trying to scope on either new products or new processes that can help and facilitate that transition. And then, of course, as you mentioned, I do a few other things. So I sit on the board of WISTA. It's probably my favorite one also, to be honest. So that's on women empowerment and helping with diversity in the shipping industry, gender equality. With MLA, where we support students with their MBA, it's an online university. The World ESG Forum, which is probably the latest edition, and it's more of a think tank to kind of align ESG initiatives across different and similar industries. So a few things there on a day-to-day basis, but I think that more or less covers what I do.
Well, you sound very busy. I have to agree with you. I think WISTA is a fantastic organization. I guess I call myself, and if you've listened to the podcast before, you know I'm a WISTA mister. And I just think it's a really great way to kind of expose the maritime industry to folks that, let's say, in other historical past settings, it may not have been as easy to access. So I think it's a great org. And it sounds like you're doing a lot of other work in the ESG world, which brings me to kind of the first little discussion about, our topic here on The Last Dinosaur is, moving into the digital world in the maritime space. And when we hear ESG, we kind of talk about digitization and decarbonization, and they sound like they go hand in hand. Talk to me a little bit about, what the club is doing, its approach, and the overall approach in maritime when it comes to ESG and moving digital. Because I feel that they move in lockstep. In our case, I think you pointed out maybe lockstep a little bit slower when comparing to other industries.
100% we're a bit slower probably and a bit more reluctant. And I guess to a certain level, it makes sense. But for me, I've said this before, I believe so. Digitalization is one of the three things that lead to a successful ESG strategy and implementation. So first, you've got the mindset and the board. Secondly, it's, understanding how to apply it to your business and aligning it with the overall business strategy. And digitalization is, for me, the hugest thing on all pillars. I mean, you mentioned decarbonization. A big part of getting there as an industry, as you know, is looking at our existing fleet, right? We've got vessels in the ocean which will be around for the next 30 or 40 years. So the best way to reach those decarbonization goals is make them more efficient. How do we do that? Through digitalization. I mean, there's a lot of providers who offer things like just-in-time arrivals at port. So you're measuring things like the weather, fuel consumption. Providers, as far as I know, who even do monitoring of how soon you need to be to optimize your hull cleaning. So there's a bunch of options out there, literally, that help you make the existing vessels operation much more efficient. Then obviously new technologies, which is a big thing, and green technologies, and how we're maybe retrofitting existing fleets or then looking at new ship designs. So all of this, the solution is digitalization. So it's quite an important pillar. But then it also does touch on other things like the social and the governance aspect, because when we're talking social, for one, if we're digitalizing processes, automating them, it means we can make it easier for seafarers or make their life safer. But it also means a new opportunities and new job roles. So that helps with the diversity element of the social pillar. And then governance, without doubt, I mean, the more accurate the data is, the more transparent we can be. So all of these perfectly tie into why it's so important to have digitalization in place. At the club, in fact, it's one of our key priorities at the moment. So we're resetting our IT department. A new chief information officer has been brought on board to make sure we're working towards all these pillars. Because accuracy of data is just, I mean, we say it a lot, what doesn't get measured doesn't get done, and we need to have that data and we need it to be accurate. We need processes to be more optimized to reach all those three pillars of the environmental, social, and governance aspect of it.
What is very interesting about your role in particular is kind of you're looking at it internally and externally, right? So you're looking at so you have to talk about the digital aspect of ESG internally and getting people on board there. And then for your clients who look to you for coverage, but now are going to be also looking for or explaining to you how they're being challenged and changing, and how that's going to impact how you cover them. Will it impact your coverage? And I think it's almost this double-edged sword, because when we talk about this to other folks, are you met with skepticism, or how do you deal with this? And I guess you can answer this in two ways, which is why it's a fascinating discussion.
I am always met with skepticism and reluctance when it comes to ESG. We did touch upon it a bit earlier. So maritime is quite a traditional industry. We're quite conservative. Obviously, that fits its profile because we're talking about assets that are around for 30, 40 years, big investments. It's not something you can just lightly test and trial and, see how it goes. So there's resistance always, and a big part of it, and what I say, like in it's a change management process, right? So with any change management process, that what you need is for people to understand it as simply as possible have some clarity around what are we trying to do and how it's going to help. So when it comes to ESG being an emerging kind of space, even though a lot of the things are things that we've already been doing as a sector, I found from personal experiences, consultants sometimes try to overcomplicate things and what it's supposed to be and all the reporting requirements, and owners are sitting there trying to run the vessels and keep people safe and get goods from one side of the world to another. And then you've got people bombarding you from different places on, you need to report on this ESG report, you need to report on the EU tax, you need to do what. So it becomes a bit overwhelming. And I get it, like the number of companies that tell me, we're just overwhelmed. We want somebody to tell us this is how you do it.
Yeah.
It's the same debate with the fuel of the future. But in all honesty, I mean, ESG is about understanding your company and what your priorities are and just setting those targets accordingly. It's nothing too complicated, and you just need the right people on board who can support you in that. And a mistake that I see in this change management process is that usually as they're trying to figure it out and how important it is to their business, they would assign it to a specific department. So that could be HR, it could be marketing, it could be legal. All of these departments are quite relevant to what you're trying to do, but they don't sit from a different mindset where you're trying to bring all of it together. So that's, I think, where the challenges arise and why there is, I guess, some kind of resistance. But in my books, at least, and what I try to do is simplify the process, make them feel comfortable, in how we're exploring these new things, and to communicate it best on your audience needs. So the easier it is for them to understand, the safer it feels to move forward with it. And again, like I say this a lot, ESG is a tag for what good owners have already been doing. If I sit with any company, we'll probably find a lot of the things that would fall under the ESG pillars. It doesn't need to be overcomplicated. You can prioritize what your needs are. And it's just about communicating it in the right way and having that overall perspective of where it fits in the business.
You talked a lot about the external folks. Internally too, you kind of have to sell it as well, right? Because you're dealing with, in its base case, is a insurance company that's a mutual, so there are no profits and things like that. So you're kind of spending other people's money in a way to move the club forward. How do you explain this internally, that adopting these two types of policies, ESG, and then dragging along, moving into a digital in a digital manner? How much difficulty have you found with the club, which is, tongue in cheek, we're the last dinosaur, is probably one of the oldest and lastest dinosaurs. And I've had guests on from other P&I clubs, and I think they would agree with me, but you definitely see some of these older parts of our industry, and I won't pick on the clubs, but the clubs, the flag states, some of the parts of the classification, even though you're seeing a lot of technology being put in the classification, but it seems to be a reaction to the market more than anything else. But internally, how do you deal with that? And dealing with that group of folks that have probably been there for a long time and very much set in their ways.
A good thing that we do have in the club, so we've got an ESG committee which I chair, but it's not like very hierarchical. It's people from different departments in all different kind of ranks and roles, from the most junior to senior, that basically are from across all offices and across all departments. And that's actually very helpful, because when these people came onto the committee, it was also because they believe in something, one of those pillars, right? They may not have it completely clear in their mind if it's what ESG is, but some are very concerned about the environment, others are very concerned about crew welfare. So if you bring these people together who have, already that passion, it's much more easier for them to convey it through departments. It's also been very useful for me personally. As you said, some people have been around for years. So if you get some of those people on board, it's much more easier for them to communicate in the right way to the people that they have been working with 20, 30 years. So they know how to deal with it a bit better. So I think it's about really utilizing the people who have some kind of a common interest, and then they will help you guide the process a bit better. I think it's also important to take baby steps in this process. So making sure there's very basic understanding starting off, and then you build on that. Another thing that I did as soon as I joined, it was the Sustainability Development Goals days in September. And we worked with the marketing department to set up a little game and quiz on the different SDGs and which West is aligned with. So it was a fun little quiz thing, and I think it helped a lot of people started to think what it's all about. Then on the benefit within the role, I mean, if they start understanding better what it is, it's easier for them to also appreciate how it can, help them with the role and communicating with with our members, with other colleagues, etc.
And I don't want to overuse this word, but it is something that, because you can empower a lot of different people to make decisions, or even just their actions can really impact a lot of the different angles of that. Even if it's just ESG roles in an office, to shut off the lights, to reduce your carbon footprint. I always thought one of the lost opportunities of some companies they had during COVID that moved to a hybrid workforce or a fully remote workforce is you could send out a note that says, we're moving fully remote. This will reduce our carbon footprint by X. I thought that was a lost opportunity for a lot of companies. And maybe that was by design. I don't know, but I saw a lot of companies who, are still hybrid, and given all this focus, especially in our industry, things is, as a vendor, you say, well, you don't understand what we're going through. Like, well, no, we do. We have an ESG policy. It may not be the same as yours, but we've documented this. And I think that that's kind of an interesting way to looking at it. It's just that simple type of empowerment to the different folks can really get that buy-in that you need.
Oh yeah, inspiration is one of the key things. I always say a big part of ESG is also the communications element of it, right? Yep. And a lot of people like Thomas, okay, similar to you being a vendor, of course, they're like European clubs. So obviously you don't have fleets. You don't own the fleet. So it's not the decarbonized.
Yep.
Decarbonizing ships is not obviously on your agenda, but we're a big part of managing and ensuring those risks that of the new technology and how we're going to be decarbonizing. So a big part of it is also, I think, sharing those stories and inspiring and making sure that people know you're on board on this journey. You want to be a part of it. You're just sharing that, you're setting that narrative. I always say this, I think ESG is such a great opportunity to reset the narrative of this industry generally. So it would be a really big missed opportunity if we didn't utilize it that way.
Going to your point real quick about being a vendor or what have you, the software that we provide, we don't necessarily run the ships, but we help ship owners run the ships and then account for their usage, account for their, emissions. And that forces us to understand what they're going through and have client meetings about what they need for the output and where they need it and which personas within their companies need it, whether it's, the pre-fixture, post-fixture, claims. It's a very interesting dynamic as a vendor, you can't stick your head in the sand. You have to be part of the conversation and share that pain. Which brings me to another kind of, we talk a lot about the E. It always seems to get the focus, but the S and G are super, super important. And you kind of alluded a little bit, we have an opportunity with ESG policies and the combination with digitization and social media we talked about a little bit earlier to really reset the narrative, as you say, in the S and the G, specifically with the S. Talk a little bit about kind of how you see that moving so that we can get, from the social media side, from how that can be improved, improve our image and improve and expand the talent pool.
For me, social media, I'm a huge fan, but if you're using it correctly. So I know obviously there's different ways that people choose to use it, but essentially it's almost a free tool. Okay, you may have somebody that you're paying to create content for you, but it's not the greatest expense in the world. And it's a tool that can reach people beyond maritime. So what we do in our industry, we're very good at gathering together at conferences and talking between ourselves. And then once you walk outside that door, if you ask anybody about maritime, they'll probably either not know what it is, or they'll say we're the most polluting industry in the world.
Or they'll say that they didn't get their toilet paper for a 2 month period at Walmart and it's all our fault. And I always use that example: toilet paper, paper towels, whatever, in and around COVID, especially when we ramped up, and then periods of time where we had delays in various parts of the US. That's the only time. And yeah, the Exxon Valdez 30 years ago, and so on and so forth.
That's actually the greatest example, especially in the S pillar before I move into WISTA and the female empowerment. During COVID, we had to launch a campaign, which I find crazy. I mean, 2021 or 2020 when we decided to launch it, to acknowledge seafarers as key workers. The stakeholders involved did a fantastic job, I won't lie, and very quickly they did get things in place. But thinking back on it, I mean, why did we even have to launch a campaign for people who are on those ships delivering goods day in and day out? And the reason is because we've always chosen to keep a low profile. We've never really shared that story. Nobody knew probably even what a seafarer is, let alone that they're a key worker.
I had a recent guest. She mentioned the terminology sea blindness. I saw a post that basically said that sea blindness is a problem, and that's being like, people don't understand how our industry interacts with their daily lives. And it is daily. Where do you get your gasoline from? Where do you get your coat from? Where do you get your, for some people, where do you get your food from, right? Some people's ships here in the US, probably a lot of it's by truck. But so it's one of these things that people don't realize, to paraphrase a little bit Mike Tyson, until it punches you in the face and it's not there, or there's a major problem. And that's kind of interesting, because I think we could do better. It's a diverse group, and what better is not easily defined. And there are some people who say, no, we'd rather just work in the backgrounds and do our things, and that's the way we always have, but puts us at a little bit of a disadvantage over time, I think.
Definitely. And I mean, we've chosen to be low key when it comes to visibility. And I think that's gradually changing. But for me, there's two ways that you can use social media. Well, there's a few ways, but as a company now, you can either just do social media, or you can do social media for impact. And those are two very different things. You see a lot of companies who would just post, oh, we were delighted to host networking drinks for our clients at this hotel. And what does that even say? I mean, what are you saying as a company? Like, there's no strategy behind that. There's no content really. There's no key messaging. Whereas you've got the opportunity to touch upon issues on like ocean health. What are you doing about ocean health? The huge efforts. I mean, nobody knows how much discussion is going into decarbonizing this industry, that we are the most environmentally friendly means of seaborne trade, that we are such an important industry. And also, of course, then you've got the other aspect of it, where it gives visibility to issues that had always been hidden, like sexual harassment or crew welfare and crew well-being, things like their happiness and conditions of work. And from there, you can use this power to like leverage for change, right? And policy change. And we've seen things move quickly. And another big thing, because you asked about WISTA, for example, and this is a great example of how, of the role of social media in changing things and resetting that narrative. I think it was 2016, I'll say, or 17, that the IMO launched the theme of the year, World Maritime Day, was empowering women in communities. And ever since, we've seen, once the awareness and the focus was that on social media, and short stories started being shared and female seafarers were being visible, I think it's reset completely the direction that we were going. So now you see much more conversation about it, discussions about policy change. So it's such an important tool. It really does help. As I say, it's very important to be using social media for impact, and not just, posting what your company does on a social level. There's so many other things that you can be posting. The content strategy needs to be there.
Yeah, I think one of the great things that kind of actually came out of COVID is that being able to employ people remotely. You don't have to be near a big city to be employed in the maritime space. If you are an operator, maybe you don't necessarily have to sit in the main office. You could sit someplace else, which I think gives companies the opportunity to look at people that they may not have been able to look at before. And maybe that's a more diverse group. However you want to define diversity, whether it's more women, more people from, let's say, sub-Sahara Saharan Africa, whatever parts of South America or inland in the United States that don't have access to the ocean. Maybe you have somebody who really, my dream is to do that, and this is a way in. And I think that could also reset the narrative because you're building a bigger community of people that are slightly different of a different mindset. I went to one of the maritime schools. My family's not involved in the maritime business, but I did the old maritime school stuff. And, I have a certain mindset, even though I try to be broad based, I have a certain cultural and educational background that is, very similar. But I do appreciate talking to other people who kind of don't, right? Because that's how you get a little bit better, I think, in any company.
That's such a great point, and I'm glad you actually mentioned it because in my description I probably missed it, and that wouldn't have been very correct. In this era also where we're striving for talent for one, so I think social media also gives you that outreach to reach people for one, but also the opportunity now that we can work remotely and there's job opportunities that do not require you to physically be in one place. I mean, it just opens up the talent pool so much, but also it helps us reach, I think, the people out there who may have never considered or came across it or understood the potential or the opportunities in this sector. So that's also quite important when it comes to diversity and inclusion.
And I think there's also a part of the sea blindness and the outreach, which social media can do through platforms like this. And I know you've been involved in other types of ones and works that, put positive campaigns out there for the maritime industry. The company I work for, not a lot of people, there's a lot of people in certain roles that don't have the shipping background, which is okay, right? Like to do certain things, you don't need to have a shipping background. That's fine. But what I found is, and I'll mention to some of my coworkers, I have a podcast and they'll listen to it like, wow, this is great. I'm getting such an education. And I tell them to listen to other ones as well, not just mine. I do that, as I mentioned before, this was a creative act doing this podcast, but then it also realized that it kind of had its life of its own of educating people who may not necessarily have had the same background or even myself or yourself that has been involved in the industry for quite some time. So I think there is a lot of positive with social media.
And yeah, actually, now that you mention it, it's so interesting. When I first joined the industry, so 2014, I had studied maritime law, but I didn't really know what it was all about, right? I mean, it's very different in a text, especially a law textbook, and the reality. And I was quite blessed to join a ship owner, so I was completely thrown into core industry. But I got so fascinated the first time I walked in and saw that interactive board where all the vessels were and where they were. I was like, this is another world and nobody knows about it. So I set out to start this radio show, and this was, back then, to interview people from the industry, not so much on the technical knowledge, but to share, what this industry is about, what does it take to be in it. And it was a great learning curve for me too, things I would have never learned in any other context. So it's so valuable to do things like your podcast and just meet the people in this industry and understand what it's all about.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that kind of helped me guide this a little bit is I deal with a lot of developers. And we were talking about one time, I said, well, we should think about a feature for STS. Yeah, what's STS? And I'm like, well, ship to ship transfer. What do you mean? So then I'm literally, thank goodness for Google or whatever. I Googled, we do a screen share, and I'm like, well, the big ship sits here and that's called the mothership, and then the daughter ship comes alongside, and they're usually going a little slow, and they put out fenders and they do all this stuff usually on the tanker space, blah blah blah. He's like, wow, that's fascinating, right? So just a little education. It took 30 seconds, and I hope that people kind of get the same thing, learning what P&I Club, we've talked about that before in our show, and now to build out a broader base on what P&I clubs are doing for ESG and the digital transformation as well is super important. When you do meet people who are outside the industry and you, let's say that 10 years ago, kind of like, yeah, I studied this, or maybe I know about, shipping, and I went on vacation on a cruise, or I saw a ship off of Athens, or in London, I see, I'm out there. What would you tell people why they should join the industry? And whether it's I want to pursue a full blown career as a seafarer, or I just want to, study law, what would you tell them?
Well, I'm quite blessed because actually I do a lot of work with youth, so it's quite refreshing to have these conversations with them. The first thing, though, I say, I mean, try and inspire rather than talk. It always works more. And things like this podcast, for example, or what I try to do, even though my time is quite limited, I keep my LinkedIn quite active. So I make sure that people following me, and especially like the younger people, they can see what, what we're doing, what it's all about. And you'd be surprised the amount of people who tell me, oh, we hadn't realized this is what shipping is, or, we would like to. It triggers that interest. But when I do get to advise them, what I say is two things. So I think the one thing is their own personal brand. And I'll explain it in a second. And the second thing is networking, right? The sooner you start networking, the better, because you get to meet people from the industry, people who you think you would like to work with in their company, do a similar role. So the best way to understand it better is to meet them, but also it's a great opportunity to make that intro once you've graduated, or when you want to make a career move. And actually, we've got some great examples. So with the UK, we're quite open to different, so from students, seafarers, to name it. It's not just managerial positions. And we've had students who have been joining our networking events and eventually ended up working for one of the ladies, they've met at the event. So networking is absolutely crucial. And the personal brand, I'm saying it like, if you want to get into shipping, you need to be quite passionate about it, ideally. When you're going on to embark on a new career, you can't really prove that with your CV. But if you've been quite active, and you're attending conferences and you're talking to people and you can show this, it's, you're showcasing your engagement. And I also advise them to try and volunteer out. This is also quite important, if they don't really know what it's about. There can be an extra set of hands at conferences. A lot of the organizers will be more than happy, especially right now, to get some help. And, you can say, I'll help with the registrations, but can I be a part of it? Or, you get to be there in this network. Some of the conferences are super expensive, so a student wouldn't necessarily be in that platform. So this is also quite important, because at a conference, you meet people. You also get to see the current topics and affairs that are going on in the industry, see what you're passionate about. If you are passionate about something, you may not like it, but I feel, and I always say, it's such a fascinating industry. For me, it's so purpose driven. I mean, we're making the world go around, and being a part of it, it's a blessing. But they can interact in these kind of settings and get that feeling. That's probably the best way forward.
I agree 100%. And about your conference point, I have a little bit of an antidote. When I was out of work, kind of transitioning from being a shipbroker into the digital world. Carlene Leiden Walker was, kind of helping me along, making me some introductions. And she said, she said, you can volunteer. I said, yep. I'll come in. And I was stuffing envelopes or something one day. I helped with registrations. I think I helped clean up, change the dais when it went from one whatever, but put me in the room, right? And it put me in the room with people and shake hands and say hello and talk to folks. And to me, that was super important. And I think some of the other even easier things to do, especially we go back to social media and using it for good, is on LinkedIn. There are so many conferences that you could go to online, or virtual webinars rather. You can go in a lot about ESG. There's a couple coming up in February, March that are kind of interesting. Unfortunately, it's not, some of them not on my time zone, but if you're a student or a young person or wanting to get in the industry or just new to the industry and kind of, okay, I have this job in marketing, I hear ESG, what should I learn about? You could probably register for some of these webinars for free, probably very low price if there is a cost, and get a push in the right direction. So I agree. It's a great industry to work. Kind of make it what your own if you put your mind to it, for sure.
Exactly.
Final question I love to ask, and I get a lot of different answers. I also get answers that people actually write books. You said you're busy. Maybe you listen to audiobooks. Which is an acceptable answer. It was actually my first answer, because the gentleman I interviewed said, I have young children. I have no time for books. I can listen to audiobooks. Are you reading anything? And it doesn't have to be, work related. It could be, I read, personally, I read, and this may be shocking to people, I read a lot of, it's called like the Star Wars extended universe. I'm a Star Wars guy. I love Star Wars. And I've been, ever since I was a little kid, I went to the first movie. I mean, I'm not going to cosplay or stuff, but I like reading those books. So like, that's on the nonfiction, I typically read that, or John le Carre, or spy novels, which I like. So it's not all business. What are you reading these days?
Yeah, no, I'm quite traditional, so I like the actual book, which is not
So do
probably,
I. Yeah, yeah.
but I do like holding the actually book in my hand and having more that I could possibly read. And I'm kind of big on like things that have to do with leadership and personal development and communications. Is kind of my passion. So at the moment, I'm trying to get through busy schedule, so a bit delayed. But The Diary of a CEO, and that's the 33 Laws of Business and Life by Stephen Bartlett. I'm not sure if you know him. He's one of the dragons at Dragon Den, has his own podcast. So I'm a huge fan, huge fan. But his book, his first one was fantastic, and this one is going pretty well to very practical, focused, short tips, which I love.
That's excellent. We'll put the link in the show notes and everything for everybody. That's really good. Yeah, I'm bouncing between a few books right now. One that's very interesting, and I'm paraphrasing the title, is How to Do Big Things.
Mhm.
And it talks about projects, doing kind of like projects. It's not a project management book, but it's like just a mindset book about how to approach these really big things. And the author gives some fantastic examples of what went really well and what went really badly, and why like these two seemingly compatible things just went the wrong direction. And I think being in a leadership position and being in a position of having to do big projects like implementation of systems, whether it's in a system like an IT system or ESG systems, I think someone like you would actually find it interesting because it breaks it down. The great comparison is the Sydney Opera House and the Guggenheim Museum in Bilbao.
Okay. Yeah, I actually love books who give you practical examples of how it can go and how it can go wrong. How it
And
can.
one was just another string of victories for the architect, and one broke the guy and drove him out of the country. Talks about why and the flaws and everything, and not just the architect's fault, but it's really interesting. And I think anybody who is looking at big projects definitely needs to take a look. But I appreciate yours as well. I will probably put that on my list because it sounds pretty interesting. Gina, I appreciate you coming on the podcast. Thank you very much for coming on and sharing your insights.
It's been a pleasure, Chris, and I look forward to seeing you soon in person, I guess.
Absolutely. For those that are listening to this part of the podcast, Gina and I will be at the CMA trade show. So we look forward to seeing you there, and I look forward to meeting you for the first time in person, Gina. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Chris.